The NFC South is a razor-tight division with every single team having an equal chance at a first-round exit in the playoffs. And today, Jeff L. and I, we are continuing on with the NFC previews here, taking a look at all the teams in the NFC South, starting with the Atlanta Falcons. And Jeff, we've got some pretty big changes here. Kevin Stefanski in as the head coach, Tommy Rees in as the offensive coordinator, Kirk Cousins, Tyler Algier, Kaderil Hodge, David Sills, KJ Osborne, and Tegan Quintoriano are all out of the picture. They have brought in Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Siemian, Brian Robinson Jr., Tyler Goodson, Jahan Dotson, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Austin Hooper, and then they spent a round 3 pick on Zachariah Branch. So we've got changes up top with the coaching staff. We've got a lot of changes on the roster. The first question I have for you, I don't even think you have an answer for, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Jeff. Tua Tagovailoa or Michael Penix, who do you expect to be the starter this year?
Well, they also cut Casey Washington too, so that just happened.
Yes.
He was, but I do think it's going to be Tua Tagovailoa. It's going to be starting early because what I was going through today, Michael Penix is not like practicing. They're talking about him being ready for week 1. Like not like ready to practice in training camp, ready to practice week 1. And so I think that
which
Tua
would be
Tagovailoa
no install with the new offense.
Exactly. And so Tua is going to be way out in front. There would be my expectation that Tagovailoa gets the first shot. And I mean, you think about it, he's the type of quarterback that probably shows very, very well in a training camp, in a practice setting relative to potentially with Penix. And so I do expect that Tua will get the first shot. There's no holdover. This is a brand new coaching staff, brand new offensive coordinator. So it's not like Penix even gets the benefit of the doubt with having the coaches previously there. I do think it's going to be Tua, and the question is going to be, is he going to be able to push the ball down the field at all, or is the shell-shocked Tua that we've seen previously where it's just first read, balls out because he doesn't want to risk very much? Is that what we're going to be working with?
And I think that, we can see this go one of two ways, and I think that's kind of the fear for me is like we know that Tua is an accurate passer. Like we saw like pinpoint accuracy running that McDaniels offense, especially earlier in his career. And then as the injuries piled up, it seemed like the arm, I don't want to say the arm strength waned, but like he never really had that like big deep ball, but he was pretty good at hitting the intermediate parts of the field. And I think that's where Drake London and Kyle Pitts do their most damage. And we're going to see this offense very consolidated to those two. I mean, like Dan Hendry and I, we just did a draft over on NFFC. We ended up with Drake London as our round 1 pick, and then we got Kyle Pitts as our round 7 pick. And we talked about it like, you can project 70% of the targets in this offense just going to those 2 players. Like there really isn't much else besides those guys. So I could see like if they just kind of keep it a simple offense, like, hey, look for Drake London. If he's not open, look for Kyle Pitts. If he's not open, check down to Bijan Robinson. Like I feel like a lot of quarterbacks are going to be able to run that offense. But so much of Tua comes down to him playing outside in the cold. Like that's where he really, really struggles. So I think him staying in the NFC South, or not staying in the NFC South, but staying in the South at least. If you look at the schedule, Jeff, there's really only one game that jumps out to me as one that could be like a rough, cold weather game. He's got to go to Cleveland on December 13th in Week 14. Outside of that, all of his other northern outdoor games are early in the season. We know the Falcons play in a dome. We know the Saints play in a dome. When he is traveling north to other places late in the season, going up against Detroit, that's going to be an indoor game. So, like, if you look at it, like, Tua has 16 of the 17 games on the schedule are favorable conditions for what we've seen from him historically.
Well, and it's interesting, too, that he landed with Atlanta because I remember we did an episode last year. He had that really came out of nowhere and had a fantastic game against the Falcons in Atlanta. And we talked about it on that episode. The mental, that's the site of Tua Tagovailoa's highest career peak, where he came in the national championship game, replacing Jalen Hurts and for Alabama to beat Georgia and win the national championship. So he goes to Atlanta now as a free agent, and there are positive vibes off that. But it's going to be interesting for him as well, because you talk about Drake London and you talk about Kyle Pitts, and he's moving from a situation where he had 2 targets previously with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle that had an outsized portion of the offensive role. The big difference here now is those players were excellent separators, I mean, we know
Right.
Tyreek Hill's high level speed, the windows that Tua Tagovailoa was throwing into, versus coming now with Drake London and Kyle Pitts. You've got two contested catch type players, two players that there's going to be a little bit tighter windows because they're going to have to fight for the ball, and so that's going to be
Hmm.
interesting to see because I think he's not the very best processor. He kind of is a read, makes the read, gets the ball out. And so how is he going to adjust to those tighter windows versus where Penix might have a leg up? And I do expect we will see both of these quarterbacks at some point this season. I mean, the health of both of them tends to lead that we will see each of them play. But Penix obviously higher level of comfort with Drake London, with Kyle Pitts. And so that'll be interesting to watch and monitor. When it comes down to projections, I've got 10 games for Tua. I've got 7 games for Penix. And so I'm kind of leaning the direction Tua getting the early start, kind of being able to get out of the gate. And then Penix, kind of getting into a situation where they're going to see whether or not there's anything left there. But one of the things that I picked up today is kind of that. I mean, I threw out casually the Casey Washington thing, but there is a bit of a purge that's going on here with the new GM coming in, new coaching staff coming in, and they are cleaning out some of those players from the previous regime. Washington was in the 24 class along with Penix. And so there's not a lot of built up love maybe for Penix here.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point about like the style of quarterbacks. Like they could not be on further ends of the spectrum when it comes to like looking for open receivers or willing to throw up that contested catch ball. And if you look, like it wasn't just in Miami, but like Tua when he was in college playing with Devonta Smith and Jerry Jeudy. Like you watch those guys, they were on an island. They were wide open. Like that offensive scheme, their skill sets, like they were able to get open and Tua could hit them. And if you look at what Michael Penix did in college, throwing the ball up to Roma Dunze. Roma Dunze, not a separator. He's a contested catch guy. Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, like the other weapons that were at Washington excelled at coming down with contested catches. And that was one of my reasons for being so bullish on Drake London last year, is that Penix will give that opportunity to throw up the ball. I can't remember the game. I think it was against Carolina, and it was at home, and it was going into halftime where they ran the same play twice in a row where Drake London was blanketed and Michael Penix just like threw a ball up into the back corner of the end zone. It got broken up. They went back to the huddle, ran the same exact play, threw it up again, and he came down with a touchdown. So like Penix trusts his receivers to come down with those contested balls, and that's not something we've ever really seen from Tua. So that lends me to the next question here, Jeff. Like, does your projection change drastically for Drake London or Kyle Pitts depending on who's starting? Like, we're not overthinking this, right? Like, if Tua Tagovailoa comes in, he's not going to suddenly be looking at Zachariah Branch and Jahan Dotson because they're better separators, right?
No, I do tend to ascribe to targets being earned, and you're going to, especially in this offense, I think this potentially presents one of the cleaner offenses. One of the reasons why we
Mm.
like them for fantasy, one of the reasons why you're loading up every time I see you drafting Kyle Pitts and Drake London there, but Bijan Robinson's involvement in the passing game as well. And so I think that's, the model that I like my model. It's gotten me good results, but at the same time, I don't have a layer of complexity to account for differences between Michael Penix and Tua Tagovailoa playing quarterback for half the seasons. I kind of just lean on Drake London's overall efficiency relative to where he is expected to be operating within the offensive scheme.
So the last question we have then, regarding Tua Tagovailoa, at least, he is falling late in drafts. He's going after Geno Smith. He's going after Fernando Mendoza, who probably isn't going to be starting week 1. He's going after Jacoby Brissett, which we don't know if Jacoby Brissett's going to start at all this year. Like, Tua Tagovailoa is falling into that like Deshaun Watson range of drafts. And I think if Michael Penix was coming back to an offense that he had familiarity with, we'd expect him to take over the reins at some point. But if Michael Penix can't practice at all, like already hasn't been there at minicamp, if he's not there at all in training camp, is it even like realistic to expect that he takes over at any point this season? Like, even if Tua Tagovailoa is struggling, do you think that they'll have faith in putting Penix in there, who missed all of training camp install?
I think they will, because I think Tua Tagovailoa struggling will likely lead to the record struggling if they're falling out of the playoff race
Yeah.
at all. There is a layer and level of, we're going to go out and get another quarterback. Let's make sure on Penix we want to see him one more time. So and then the health of it too. And I don't love projecting health on it, but I mean, if we knew we were going to get 17 games of Tua out there, that would be probably surprise everybody. So I think that that factors as well. Maybe hedging the bet a little bit. That's where I'm kind of landing on 10 games, 7 games, splitting it between those two. When it comes to fantasy, it's I don't know that either are particularly targets for me. I do obviously we do like London, Pitts, Bijan Robinson. We like that infrastructure there, and value could present itself. I do think that I've ended up. We do a redraft that we do very, very early, and I think I got Penix pretty late because I punted quarterback a little bit in that draft. But other than that, yeah, I'm just not. I mean, best ball builds, 3 quarterback builds, those types of things. I want a more sure third quarterback, I think, than dealing with like the Cleveland situation or the Atlanta situation. I don't really like messing around with that.
Well, let's talk about the receivers here, and we kind of already have. You can't really talk about Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix without talking about the receivers here. But Drake London, the clear top dog here, and I have been very unabashed in my love for Drake London. I'm taking him late in round 1 of best ball drafts. Still have him like just outside of that elite tier of fantasy or of dynasty receivers, but think that he can be there. I mean, this guy has had a 29% or better target share in all but one season that he has been in the league. We saw last year over this little stretch in between injuries, where over a 6-week stretch, he was averaging 110 yards and a touchdown per game. Like, I am of the belief that Drake London is just one of the most talented wide receivers in football. I think he gives you a safe floor, gives you a sky-high ceiling. I don't know how much we really need to talk about Drake London because I think that people realize that he is good, but is there another wide receiver that is even going to matter here? I mentioned Jahan Dotson. I mentioned Zachariah Branch, the rookie that they drafted. Olamide Zaccheaus, the guy that I liked quite a bit last year, is now in Atlanta as well. Are any of these guys going to matter, or is it just going to be the Drake London show?
I mean, Branch is the only other one that I'm interested in. I would be surprised if it's Dotson, if it's Zaccheaus, giving meaningful fantasy contributions. But I do look at the rookie Branch, day 2 rookie. And I think when you're looking at Drake London, looking at Kyle Pitts, the skill sets of both of those players, a explosive after the catch player maybe brings the vertical element. That's Branch's game. And so I think that that's where it becomes interesting on him. You can easily envisage kind of seeing London, Pitts working off each other in a high-low game, operating in the deep to intermediate area, and then Branch kind of working underneath that. As we've got these guys run the defense off, dump it over to Branch as he's kind of coming around on this jet sweep or something like that. And so I think that that's where Branch can have interest, and he can be a big play potential threat there. I mean, Dotson.
I think it's very similar to what we saw. Like, it wasn't super fantasy relevant, but like Malik Washington pulled 65 targets in a role like that last year, where he was just kind of working right off the line of scrimmage. And that's kind of what I expect from Zachariah Branch. I don't think he's going to do much more than working near the line of scrimmage, but Tua Tagovailoa, who does get a little gun shy when he's under pressure, he does like to have that check down option. Like we saw, Devon Achane and Malik Washington just gobbling up targets at the line of scrimmage last year. It's good for Bijan Robinson, but I can see Zachariah Branch. I mean, with where he's going, like round 20 in best ball drafts, he could end up getting 60 to 70 targets, which could play for a round 20 pick.
Yeah, I mean, I've got him at 71 targets in my model here, 44 catches, 531 yards, a couple of touchdowns. I mean, let's not bury the lead. If we're talking about the passing game, he's got a pretty solid underneath target that's going to be coming out of that backfield that I do expect to get more than a fair share of targets in Bijan Robinson. So he's not for lack of needing options that are creative after the catch, but it does play well potentially for Branch. I think Branch, you're looking at his development. Can he win vertically? Can he play the ball down the field? Becomes the most significant question there, because they do have that opening there. They need that type of receiver. Dotson and Zaccheaus are solid veterans that they know exactly what they're going to give you. They need Branch to have kind of be that deep threat, but also that yak threat. And I think that Branch potentially has that in his game for a player that we saw it in fits and starts. We didn't really click until going to Georgia and being in that low yards after catch game.
So let's talk next, Jeff, about the tight ends, because, I mean, when I say tight ends, there's one tight end that we're going to talk about here, Kyle Pitts. this is one of the just weirdest situations. And, we talk a lot about perception and how the market reacts to players. I feel like people have just gotten like way too loud about the I don't know, just like the Kyle Pitts fade. I don't know. It's so weird to me. Like when I look at Kyle Pitts, I see a 25-year-old who had one of the best rookie seasons in NFL history, and then had a very bad knee injury that took him a couple years to recover from. But like last year, the speed was back, the agility was back. He was second among all tight ends in targets. He was second among tight ends in fantasy points. And sure, if you look at the per game numbers, Tucker Kraft would have outscored him, and there were some other guys. But like he stayed healthy for a full year. He was productive. He gave you huge spike weeks. If you made the playoffs with Kyle Pitts, you almost assuredly won your league last year. And now here he is, still just 25 years old, on the right side of the age curve, gets a big, massive extension. And like anytime I tweet anything remotely positive about Kyle Pitts, I'm just inundated with like, he sucks, bust, blah, blah, blah. Like, why do people have this perception that Kyle Pitts isn't good when he's been nothing short of good since he came into the league?
Well, he talks about this with Quentin Johnston a little bit, but I mean,
Yep.
because things that have been said previously on social media, because people didn't buy when it was super cheap, and there's buyer remorse on it. So that's all that reaction is, because the people that did buy, and you got to think about too, who's responding to what you put out there. The people that did buy cheap on Kyle Pitts, they're not going to be like, Kluge, you're an idiot. I bought cheap on Kyle Pitts, and so it's
Right.
there's that, and it's really so often. I think the comments that you're going to get off of that are, it's insecurities that people are concerned they're the wrong spot when it comes down to it. So instead of looking at what you have to say and potentially adjusting, they're going to immediately scoff and say, no way. I have not been actively drafting incorrectly for the last 3 months.
Yeah. I mean, here, I'm reading a comment right now from a pro Kyle Pitts tweet today. We're recording a couple days early. This episode's going to come out on Friday, but we're recording Tuesday evening right after he got his extension. And somebody says, fool me one time, shame on you. Fool me 4 times. And it's like, what? How did he fool you 4 times? He had 1,000 yards as a rookie. He was the tight end 2 in scoring last year. But like, why are people, and like, this is an ongoing thing. Like my home league group chat, love these guys, dear friends of mine. They hate Kyle Pitts. And like anytime I mention Kyle Pitts, they're like, oh, like I shared the news about him getting an extension today, and they said, oh, well, maybe now he'll finally start to get targeted. He was second in the league in targets last year. Like, I don't get it, Jeff. Like, everybody just has this like very warped idea of who Kyle Pitts actually is. Like in my rankings, I've got him this year as my tight end 4. And like he is really close to Colston Loveland. Like he's kind of that like tight end 3B. And if you look at our consensus rankings, he is our tight end 3. Like Jason Wood, who does our projections right now, has Kyle Pitts ahead of Colston Loveland. He's got him ahead of Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin, all these other guys that we're getting excited about. But for whatever reason, like drafters are just leaving him for dead. I really struggle to wrap my mind around it.
Well, I've done the AFC projections, and I've got Kyle Pitts ahead of Tyler Warren and Harold Finn as well. So I'm there. He's very obviously the number 2 target within this offense, and Bijan Robinson's the number 3 target. There's no number 4 target. So yes, it's absolutely there. And I mean, I don't know. People, again, they're insecure about being in the wrong spot, so they're going to react and comment on something. The people that are thrilled with the value that they got on Pitts are probably going to see your tweet and yeah, I agree, and I'm just going to move on because I'm not going to do anything, or I'll drop a like, and that's it.
Well, one thing that we can agree on as a whole, me, you, everybody on Twitter, people drafting fantasy football leagues, Bijan Robinson is awesome. I don't think we're going to get much pushback on that one. I think, the only real question or conversation worth having about Bijan Robinson is whether you prefer him ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs or not. I do prefer Jahmyr Gibbs ever so slightly, but I mean, you're really splitting hairs here. And when you look at both of these guys, drafted in the same year, came in the same year, they both have breakaway run potential, they both have touchdowns, they both catch the ball, and now where Tyler Algier has been this annoying thorn in the side for years, he's now out of the picture, and we have to deal with Brian Robinson, but that feels like a little bit of a downgrade. And then with Jahmyr Gibbs, he's had to deal with David Montgomery, and now he's out of the picture, and they downgrade with Isaiah Pacheco. So it feels like both of these guys, Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, are just cleared for takeoff to have career seasons.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, the question of Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs, the answer is yes. I mean, like
Right.
I'm thrilled with either of them. Sure, it's great. You've got to pick between the two. Okay, twist my arm. I'll probably play it as I'll take Gibbs here and Bijan here, and kind of move that direction. But yeah, I do think it's to have a firm stance on it. I'll get there. I mean, I have done projections for the South. We've not done the North yet. So next episode, when we ask this question again about Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson, when we're talking about the Lions, I will have a definitive answer for you, Dave.
So the other thing I want to talk about regarding this backfield, of course, is Brian Robinson and how you expect him to play in. Because for years we saw, Tyler Algier would get an annoying amount of work, especially near the goal line. Now, it didn't stop Bijan Robinson from being a top 3 fantasy running back, but are you projecting a similar role for Brian Robinson, where he comes in, gets 20-30% of the touches, get some goal line work here or there? Or do you think that now they are just going to lean on Bijan a little bit more than ever and just kind of using Brian Robinson as that insurance policy?
Well, I know it used to be the curse of 400, but I think now it's like the curse of whatever is convenient in order to make content on, like it's like 370 or something like that. But I know Bijan Robinson was just underneath that last year. I don't think there's going to be any issue hitting that number this year. I do not expect Brian Robinson to take nearly as much work as Tyler Algier did. I mean, the organization loved Tyler Algier. The coaching staff loved Tyler Algier. I do think there was a level of guilt potentially with him coming off that strong rookie season, having 1,000 yards, and then them going out and drafting Bijan Robinson. I think they're legitimate. They felt bad about it in the building a little bit, but they couldn't pass up Bijan Robinson. I don't think there's any of that there with Brian Robinson. I mean, we know Brian Robinson is at this point, just like last year with the 49ers with Christian McCaffrey. Brian Robinson wasn't preventing right. Christian McCaffrey from hitting the number that you're not supposed to hit in fantasy. And I would expect that while Algier did hold Bijan Robinson underneath, so we're clear for takeoff Bijan Robinson this year, I don't think Brian Robinson there. He just profiles in my numbers here as more of a standard backup running back that you kind of see across the league, where he'll get his carries, get a couple carries here and there, 5 to 7 per game. But to have a major split there, was we did see some games where it was 50-50 split between Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. We did see a lot of involvement. If the game was out of hand at all, we would see a lot more Tyler Algier versus, I think, Bijan Robinson is
I wish I had the numbers. It was something like over 50% of Tyler Algier's touches last year came when they were in the lead in the second half. And I don't know the exact number. Somebody on YouTube or whatever, you can fact check me if I'm wrong there, but it was something like Tyler Algier, yeah, he had an annoying amount of touches, but most of them just came in garbage time. And yeah, as fantasy managers, we would love to see Bijan Robinson out there just ripping off 60-yarders in garbage time. But I think the Falcons kind of want to preserve one of their best weapons when they have the opportunity. The good news is this isn't a great defense and might not be a great offense either. So there might not be a lot of garbage time where Bijan is afforded the opportunity to sit. So, Jeff, this is a clean offense. We talk clean and dirty offenses. This is as pure as it gets. I don't know if there's much more to talk about here that we haven't discussed already. Any closing thoughts on the Falcons, or do we want to move on to the Panthers?
Well, it's just going to be interesting to see Stefanski, because the Browns were among the league leaders in play volume last year, and they were more of a pass-heavy team. And so it's one that you cannot get probably further from a couple of years ago when it was the Arthur Smith Falcons and really run heavy, lots of tight ends, lots of Desmond Ridder playing quarterback, to Kevin Stefanski coming in what probably should project as a pass first offense. And so I think that's the biggest thing, talking about clean offenses. If they ramp it up where they're the Browns and they have the most, I mean, we already know that Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts are really, really strong for fantasy. If they ramp it up towards the play volume, this could be one of those offenses that you want all the parts of it. And it's really difficult. You're probably not going to be able to get Bijan Robinson and Drake London on too many teams together. You can easily get Kyle Pitts with Bijan Robinson or Drake London, should you go that direction. Probably if you're really going that way, you'd feel a little bit better about the quarterback situation of having that quarterback you knew you could could lock in there for the stack. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what Stefanski does in this departure away from a couple of coaches ago now at this point, but the Arthur Smith regime.
And maybe I've just talked myself into this, so give me a sanity check here, Jeff, because I've ended up with a lot of Drake London and Kyle Pitts teams, and the way that I kind of convinced myself that this will work out. I mean, my home dynasty league, I have both of these guys. I've drafted them in a ton of best ball leagues. I think I've got 4 or 5 NFFC high stakes teams where I've ended up with those two players. And the way I look at it, like they're both giving you solid floors and ceilings on any given week. And then if Drake London goes down, Kyle Pitts becomes a immediate top 2, top 3 tight end. If Kyle Pitts goes down, Drake London becomes a top 3 wide receiver. So I feel like there is, very, very good standalone value with these guys. And then if one of the other goes down, then the other one becomes like one of the most elite players at their position. Do you agree with that? Or is this me just selling myself on 2 players that I like?
Well, I mean, London eats first off. So that's most important.
Of course.
So I don't know that I put too much on London having contingent upside with Pitts out of the lineup. I think London is going to London. But, I mean, on floor could, this could go sideways where it's the two
It could just average 14 points a game.
Yeah. I mean, it would be unlikely, especially given having Bijan Robinson. That's my only thought there on floor. And I probably would have to dig in a little bit more on it, not being on the spot on what do you really get? Because yes, Kyle Pitts, I agree with you. And he's very high in my projections. A lot of his scoring came in one game with Kirk Cousins at quarterback and Drake London not in the lineup. And that is kind of the pause there, that while he was the tight end 2, it was tight end 2 by a mile behind Trey McBride, and it was kind of as default. It was the other options that we were looking at. We know Tyler Warren fell off towards the end of last year. Colson Loveland didn't come on until the end of last year. We didn't have Brock Bowers last year. So that was the tight end 2 finish by the most default possible.
There's an
tight end
asterisk,
2 finish. Yeah, I mean, a little bit. Great season still and massive game when it was really, really important. But he does have that overall upside. It absolutely is there. And we have seen, games in this division or games with the Falcons can turn into absolute track meets. And when it comes down to it, when you're trying to win in the playoffs, the potential upside is definitely there.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the Carolina Panthers. And this is a team who is running back the same coaching staff as last year. Just made some minor tweaks around the edges here. They got rid of Rico Dowdle and Hunter Henry. They brought in Andy Dalton, who I don't even remember where Andy Dalton was last year. He went somewhere else for a cup of coffee, and now he's back in Carolina, where
Andy Dalton
really liked
is in Philadelphia, I think.
Is he? I could have swore that I saw. Maybe I've got a mistake here. Nothing like, you are right. All right, I made a mistake there. So they lost Andy Dalton. They didn't bring Andy Dalton back. They lost Andy Dalton. That's right. And then they brought in Kenny Pickett. That's it. So Kenny Pickett is the new backup. Kenny Pickett, who was in Philadelphia. So those guys got flipped in free agency. And then in addition to adding Kenny Pickett, they added A.J. Dillon and John Mechie. And then their draft pick in round 3, they got Chris Brazzell. So a few minor changes, but nothing drastic here. Jeff, are you fact-checking me? Kenny Pickett, he is
Panther, the backup quarterback for the Panthers, yes.
All right, then we got there. All right, so no Andy Dalton. That was a mistake on my part. But let's start with Bryce Young here, because this is the straw that stirs the drink, as they say. Like, we know that we like the running backs here. We know we like the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. The weapons are here. Dave Canales is a proven coach. It feels like Bryce Young has done just enough to keep his job. And that's about it. I was on a show with Matt Harmon recently, and we were kind of talking through it. Like, Bryce Young's rookie season, he was like the 30th best quarterback in the league. And then year 2, he was like the 25th best quarterback. And then last year, he was like the 20th best quarterback. So, like, he's trending towards being potentially a league average quarterback this year, but hasn't come close to living up to the number 1 overall billing. So how do you feel about Bryce Young, Jeff? Like, you and I were in on him last offseason. We were in on him the season before. Are you still in on Bryce Young, or are we starting to get a little impatient here?
He was better the second half of last year. And, some of that is even that Rams game that in my mind, like, I'm just looking at the numbers now. In my mind, that Rams game was a lot bigger than I think it ended up being. 206 yards.
4 touchdowns, I think, right?
3
3 touchdowns, yeah.
touchdowns passing. The biggest thing with him that changed, and I think this is fascinating, he ran for 40 yards week 1. And week 1, Jacksonville handled that game. That game was over. From week 2 through week 11, he averaged 4.8 rushing yards per game. From week 12 through week 7, 4.8. From week 12 through week 17, he averaged 26.8. And so that is a difference there of him starting to run a little bit and scramble a little bit more. And part of me wonders,
he's got legs. He's just small. Like, he doesn't like getting hit, but
Right.
he can move. He can scoot.
Right. And if you remember back, we'll talk about Baker Mayfield in a little bit, but if you watched Baker Mayfield in college was running all over the place. And then Baker Mayfield, when he got to the NFL, he was not running all over the place. And then the last couple of years in Tampa, that seemed to be kind of what was unlocked with his rushing. And part of me wonders if, I mean, everything across the board, the second half of this year, Bryce Young, with Drake London, there's a lot of things going on right now, but Bryce Young came back the second half of this year.
NFC North overload today. Too much NFC North information. Yes.
I'll tell you what, but he was solid over the second half last year, especially for fantasy. And so if the game's starting to slow down a little bit and he's reading and seeing those situations where he can scramble a little bit, the opportunity is there. He starts to add that in, and then defenses start to be a little bit more honest with him, play him a little bit differently. And so that is where it starts to become interesting. And he's a player that I think the consensus is far, far too low on him, especially given what we saw over the second half of last year. I mean, that Rams game that they lost in the playoffs, that was back and forth, and he was moving them down the field. Like, he was in that's a good Rams defense. And so I think that there are things clicking now for Bryce Young, that he's showing the signs of what we want to see. And it's a little bit later than maybe we wanted to see it. The signs are starting to be there of the player that we expected to see. Now, that being said, the Carolina Panthers went out and said, we're not going to talk about a contract extension here. Even if you would be eligible for a contract extension, we're not going to have those conversations. We're going to play it out here. And so I think that creates a lot of uncertainty around this. I mean, it might be a situation where he goes out and responds with that. And the overall passing volume, I think, is the bigger issue there. And
right. And I made the joke that, like, this team can be, like, down 3 scores coming out of halftime, and Dave Canales is still out here trying to establish the run. Like, that's what Dave Canales did in Seattle. That's what he did in Tampa Bay, and that's what he's doing in Carolina now. Like, he really wants to win by just pummeling other teams, and that's why we saw, like, the first big move that they made after his first season was to completely reinforce the offensive line, because that's the style of play that he wants. And it's kind of weird. We see, like, one of two things in these Dave Canales offenses, either them playing jumbo sets and running the ball, or when they finally do get to the point that they need to commit to the pass, then we just see empty sets and they just go 5 wide and they air it out in the fourth quarter. And there's, like, no middle ground. It's either, like, jumbo sets and a heavy run game, or just empty sets and just throwing the ball when they're down late.
Yeah, in their play volume, we had the conversation about play volume with Kevin Stefanski and where Cleveland was. The Panthers were on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Like, they like to slow it down, and part of it, a recipe worked for them. They made the playoffs last year, and so that can we see the supporting weapons for Bryce Young take a step forward? Can we see him start to get in a little bit more of these wide open scripts and deliver some consistently 250 plus yard games? Is this going to be, because I think it was last year, might have been the year before, he had that stretch. Yes, I remember I was tracking it last year because he went 1, 2, 3.
He was the top. I remember at the end of
7 games in a row where he didn't hit 200 passing yards in the middle of last year.
Yes. All right. I wasn't sure where you were going with that, because, like, it does seem like Bryce Young has been so streaky throughout his career. Like, he has that where you say 7 games in a row without 200 yards. But I remember over the final month of the 2024 season, he was number 1 in QB scoring, like, tied with Baker Mayfield. So I think that's kind of what leads us to, like, still have this faith for Bryce Young, is back-to-back seasons he has finished strong, and we're like, if this
Yeah.
can just carry over into next year, and maybe that's just who Bryce Young is, just like slow out the gate, and then he just gets more comfortable as the season goes on. But I'm still a believer in Bryce Young, and like it's not uncommon to see these guys with the pedigree. Like I think of Jared Goff, like so many people, Jared Goff, the first 4 or 5 years of his career, just wrote him off as a bust, said he wasn't going to figure it out. And like there was team success, but they always kind of attributed it to the coach and the offensive line and the defense and other things that they had going on here. And now Jared Goff has become one of the better quarterbacks in the league. I think that Bryce Young can still get there too. And maybe it's with Carolina, maybe it's with another team, but I'm not ready to just like be completely out on this Panthers offense yet.
He's quarterback 26 in our football guys ADP, and really the only quarterbacks behind him. There's Aaron Rodgers, there's Geno Smith, but then it runs into these quarterbacks that we're not sure who's going to be the quarterback once, and he's kind of really the fall off point there. And we know Geno Smith and Aaron Rodgers aren't going to be adding too much with their legs, and I think that that's the biggest thing that we haven't seen Bryce Young fully unlock yet. That we saw glimpses of last year of him, that athleticism that we know is there, starting to translate and get comfortable in that area of the game as further development from Tedero McMillan and the rest of the receiver core helps raise the ceiling there. And so, yeah, I just think it's we buy cost, we buy in on where we can get players, and Bryce Young is really just about the last follow-up point, especially if you want to wait on quarterback a little bit in a best ball build, if you want to get 3 quarterbacks there, if you are looking at super flex and you're looking for, maybe you have a lower end quarterback 2 and you just want somebody that you can go out and acquire for reasonably cheap and that could have that potential to lock in as a high upside player. I think that that's where I'm seeing Bryce Young right now.
Well, I think we've talked enough about Bryce Young, but I think he is probably the most intriguing player in this offense, and that kind of ties in with the Dave Canales talk as well, which we had. But let's talk about the receivers here, because I think we do have a little bit more clarity than I think people expect. To me, like it is very obvious, like Tedero McMillan, like we saw this guy pulling elite target share, making plays after the catch, contested catch rate was high, caught touchdowns, did everything we want to see. Like there wasn't a box that he didn't check his rookie season. Dealt with some injuries later in the year, which caused a little dip in efficiency, but still finished strong. We know he is a good player. And then I think Jalen Coker has very much so solidified himself as the number 2, and he got that extension. So, we know that they have faith in him as well. Those are really, in my opinion, like the 2 guys that matter here. I think we're going to see a rotation with Xavier Legette and Chris Brazel and Jimmy Horn, John Mechie, who they brought in. But like for fantasy purposes, I see the only really relevant guys here being Tedero McMillan, who should be drafted as a high-end wide receiver 2, Jalen Coker kind of falling into that flex territory. But these are the guys that I see mattering.
Yeah, I think I would be. It seems like I'd be a little bit surprised to see Xavier Worthy not traded. I think that they might be ready
Xavier
to
Legette.
kind of Xavier Legette. Boy, we are just on fire this episode. Yeah, Xavier Legette traded. It really is. I think that my expectation would be that they're going to move on from him because I think they bring in Brazel in. He can really stretch the field vertically. Jimmy Horn can do a lot of those yak type of things if they want to factor him in. I do think that Jalen Coker has solidified himself as the wide receiver 2. He's a good value right now to go out and get Jalen Coker, and all of those receivers, Jalen Coker, Brazel, they can stretch the field and allow space for Tedero McMillan to operate and have a lot of volume. McMillan's no slouch on working downfield either. And so I think that it seems all natural relative to still the hope that Xavier Legette might click and work out. It kind of seems like he strikes me as a guy that I know in college when we did the rookie guide, maturity was a little bit of a concern, and then he gets drafted to the hometown Panthers, and I can't help but wonder if he lands as one of these guys that getting him out of the hometown might be a good idea. Maybe, I don't know, or it's just the technical skills and ability doesn't match the overall potential physical package that he offers. They don't seem particularly high on Legette figuring it out anymore. It seems like last year they kind of went out of their way to get him comfortable, to give him every single opportunity possible, and it just didn't work. and they go out, they draft Brazel. They want to see what they have from the second year from Jimmy Horn here, and they know who the top two receivers are going to be.
And they've had a type, like where they have consistently, like they went for Jonathan Mingo with an early round 2 pick, and that didn't pan out, and they moved on from him in year 2. Like they traded him in the middle of his second season.
Yep.
Then they went back to the well with Xavier Legette, 32nd overall pick on him. Doesn't seem like it's working out, so they might move on from him. And I think that Coker extension really tells us how they feel about Legette. That like they need to lock down that guy who, props to you, Jeff. I remember you being very high on Jalen Coker in that pre-draft process, and he has just been looking better and better. And I know there was a lot of talk last year, like he was dealing with that preseason injury. We weren't sure how he would come back. He came back, looked fantastic, and locked down that role. So the other position that we need to talk about here, the running back or the tight ends. And, you know, Tommy Tremble is a fun name. Mitchell Evans, we liked him as a prospect. Jatavian Sanders is probably the top guy there, but, like, how much do the tight ends matter here? Like, I could talk myself into Jatavian Sanders because athleticism off the charts. He's still young, but we just haven't really seen much from him yet. And then Mitchell Evans is just like annoyingly involved. Like he is on the field a lot more than we'd expect him to be. Tommy Tremble is out there as well when he's healthy. So I just see this as kind of a frustrating rotation of tight ends. I can't see any guy clearly emerging. And I mean, through the hundreds of drafts that I've done already this year, I don't think I've drafted a single Panthers tight end.
No, I mean, I was towards the very, very end of my Scott Fishbowl, and tight end, it benefits tight ends.
Juiced,
and I was
yeah.
looking at Sanders, and I was like, I don't really know if I want to go there. I do think that if one guy were to lock the job down, I think it would be Evans. Would be the best chance of that guy really emerging as an overall threat. And really that would kind of come down on, you can see it working out where he's not overly exciting. He's kind of like the Cade Otton of this offense, and Canales' old team with Tampa Bay, where Cade Otton is just kind of the solid blocker who can also has soft hands, can kind of contribute there, as we have the receivers doing all those receiver things. I think Sanders, I mean, they tried hard to involve Sanders at the beginning of last year. He was injured, came back, and he was just a complete afterthought. They didn't even bother integrating him too much into the offense. I think that was a swing on the athleticism, and it certainly is not being written off at any point. I mean, the potential is still there, but I think when you look at overall skill set as kind of that inline tight end of what you expect out of the position, that's where Evans brings it as the potential for the highest upside. That being said, I don't think that there's a lot of optimism on one of these players, and especially in fantasy. I mean, if you're in a deep dynasty league and you're looking at your final picks, you know, Evans or Sanders might be worth it there on just it breaks that direction, because when you're talking about ambiguity within a room and you're talking about not having anybody that solidify themselves, if somebody does step up, then they can solidify themselves and they can be that guy. And so that potential is there. That's why we chase ambiguity. That's why we look at these situations. But I mean, we're already talking about the volume potentially being down in this offense, the demanding target share for Tedorovic, McMillan, Jalen Coker emerging. It just doesn't have a lot of room to breathe if they're going to be playing multiple tight ends.
So let's talk about the running backs here. And Jeff, I have seen it now in NFFC drafts, which are pretty predictive of how we'd expect ADP overall to look. It's usually a little bit ahead of the curve. I'm seeing Jonathan Brooks starting to go ahead of Chuba Hubbard in these drafts right now. Looking at your projections, you would have some pretty strong words for anybody drafting Jonathan Brooks ahead of Chuba Hubbard, I'd imagine. And, you know, I'm an unabashed Jonathan Brooks lover. Like, I have been touting this guy since he came into the league. Just a huge, huge fan of the talent. The injuries have been brutal, but still very young. Sounds like he is back to his pre-injury self. There's been a lot of good buzz about him in camp. I don't know if you saw the clip recently, Jeff. It was after minicamp. They asked him, so, you know, you wear these tracking chips. Do you know what your top speed is at? And he goes, I don't remember the top number off the top of my head, but I can tell you I'm a lot faster than Chuba. So already out here, you know, kind of gunning for that top spot in Carolina. But you still prefer Chuba Hubbard in your projections and your rankings. Do you see a world, though, where Jonathan Brooks could end up taking over this backfield?
Well, yeah. I mean, we were in a world last year where Rico Dowdle took over the backfield. So
Right. Fair.
there
Good point. Yeah.
there definitely is a world where Jonathan Brooks could take
That
over the
was injury
backfield.
related. I mean, it's not like Rico just took over. Like Chuba Hubbard got hurt, and then Rico took over, and then as Chuba Hubbard got healthy, it looked like he kind of regained the backfield late in the year.
Yeah, and I think it's, it is. We saw two running backs last year, but when I break down and a lot of where my position lands, so step behind my process, but I go game by game and I really try to distill what the running back one, what the running back two had in this game to try to basically filter out some of those injuries back and forth and not having. I do the same thing with wide receiver target share where I like what is the top receiver in this game? How many targets did they pull? What is the true wide receiver target share for the number one receiver within this offense? And when I broke it down, despite numbers ending up somewhat similar last year on the whole, it really was one back or the other when it came down to the games. And so that's where I'm comfortably on Chuba Hubbard relative to Jonathan Brooks. I mean, my process, my numbers here, I think when we've had conversations, if you're in an actual draft, I mean, sometimes the projections aren't the most useful
Right.
thing in that type of situation because the upside absolutely is there for Jonathan Brooks. I think all things considered, the trust is there for Hubbard. We've seen Hubbard handle volume within this offensive scheme prior to last year, 230 plus rushes in each of the previous seasons. So that's where we, despite maybe in our memory thinking of them playing two backs last year, it really was pretty clean on who the top back was. And so that's where I've got Hubbard,
And
who I project as the top back.
Until Rico Dowdle had like the best 2 game stretch in NFL history. Like that is what earned him an opportunity there. And yeah, there's context, revenge game against two bad defenses, whatever it may be. But Chuba Hubbard has earned the trust of this staff after a slow start to his career. I mean, he got that big extension when he took over for an injured Jonathan Brooks. I just can't help but look at the upside with Jonathan Brooks. I mean, this was the RB1 of his class, a guy that they drafted in round 2 despite coming off the ACL and still so young. Like when you look at his age, like he is younger than a lot of the rookies out here. So where there's excitement for, Emmett Johnson and Katron Allen and some of these rookie running backs, like in dynasty leagues, if I could flip any of these day 3 running backs from this year's class for Jonathan Brooks, I'm doing that in a heartbeat. I don't know if anybody is actually doing that trade at this point now that we're getting some positive steam on Jonathan Brooks, but I still just can't help but keep a light on for him. It's a prospect that I really liked who should see an opportunity this year, and all of the buzz that we're hearing out of minicamp is that he's healthy, and we'll see how that transpires throughout training camp. But any final thoughts on the Panthers, Jeff?
Well, it's, again, can Tedero McMillan, can Jalen Coker, can Bryce Young, can Jonathan Brooks take a step forward and really establish themselves? Or is this going to be, again, a low volume kind of offense that's really hoping to grind games out? Like thinking about last year, making the playoffs last year, but like that Packers game where they barely threw for 100 yards and they won like 16-13. This team really wanted to win ugly last year. And are they going to still want to win ugly, or are these young players going to hit their moment and really allowed to be spread their wings? I think that's going to be the interesting thing about the Panthers, because this is an offense that, as we look for these teams that just really kind of were just wrong on the offense potentially, or it ends up a lot better, Panthers to me seem like there's a lot of pieces there where we like Canales as an offensive mind. We like the young ascending players here, and the potential is here for this to be one of those teams that you just want all the pieces of, because the value returns much higher than what you have to pay right now for it.
Completely agree. Now let's talk about the New Orleans Saints, and this is another team that is running back the coaching staff. Didn't make any massive changes here, but in free agency they lost Jack Stoll, Foster Moreau, Taysom Hill, Samori Toure. In free agency they added Travis Etienne, one of the first big signings in free agency, got himself a big deal. They also added Ty Chandler, Zach
We're doing
Wilson.
Achane, Dave.
Achane, I'm sorry. Yes. When we talk about historical, like what he did in Jacksonville, he was Etienne, but Saints, Travis Achane. Absolutely. Draft picks: Jordan Tyson, 8th overall; Oscar Delp, 73rd overall; Bryce Lance, 136th overall; and then another wide receiver that they got on day 3 in Berrien Brown. So made some pretty strong reinforcements to the passing attack. And I like this, Jeff, because what this tells me is we saw enough from Tyler Shuck last year that we are going to give him some extra weapons and really see what we've got in this guy. So for an aging year 2, and I know it sounds crazy, an aging year 2 quarterback, but Tyler Shuck is already up there in age. Like, they don't have a developmental plan here. It's kind of, hey, we're going to throw this guy in the fire. We're going to give him some new weapons. And I think this is kind of the make or break year for Tyler Shuck. Like, if he looks good, then they probably run it back in 2027. And if he doesn't, then they're going to probably find another option. I don't think this is a guy that they want to, like, wait to see how it plays out over the next 4 or 5 years. They're given an opportunity now to lock down that long-term job.
Yeah, because you're putting the pieces in around him to allow him to succeed, but by doing that, you're also putting the pieces in around him that the next guy could potentially succeed as well. And I mean, I did the Chris Olave extension get done? I don't know that it did.
No. And
Yeah.
Chris Olave, it's been kind of weird. We'll talk about that when we talk about the wide receivers, but still unable to practice as he's coming back from these blood clots that ended his season, where he's on blood thinners right now, and they're optimistic that he can return, but wasn't able to do much at minicamp. And I don't want to make a big story out of this because we still have to kind of wait and see how this plays out. But as of now, June 23rd, still not practicing.
We will talk about wide receivers when we talk about wide receivers, but
Let's talk about Tyler Shuck for now.
yeah, and I think it's more often than not. I did a show with Dan Hendry. We talked about quarterbacks on the show with Dan Hendry. We talked about Dynasty. We talked about best ball quarterbacks. That should be out on the Dynasty feed probably by the time that you're listening to this. In that show, we talked about just kind of general what we see so often with these day 2 quarterbacks. The track record for day 2 quarterbacks is not overly phenomenal. And we see a handful of guys that really right now, off the top of my head, the only relevant day 2 quarterback is Jalen Hurts that I can think of. I'm sure there's
Derek
other ones.
Carr, Andy Dalton. It's not a big list.
Guys that are I'm saying relevant at this
Right.
moment in time. Like we're
Right.
no longer Derek Carr is no longer relevant. So kind of as a general rule of thumb, I think when you're seeing excitement around these day 2 quarterbacks, similar to Tyler Shuck, probably over time, moving off of these guys when you're in this, if you're in Dynasty or kind of going that direction, ends up playing pretty well for you over time. That's not to say that Tyler Shuck doesn't have the tools that we like to see. It's not to say that he doesn't have the supporting cast that we like to see. It's players that have the capability of hitting 4,000 passing yards and 500 rushing yards. Tyler Shuck is definitely on that list of having that dual threat potential there. It could happen. Absolutely could happen. It started out strong, but what we see so often, we've talked about this before as well, is defenses playing vanilla, defenses kind of allowing the let's figure you out and let's have you, and I think that plays really well for a player like Shuck, who is very, very experienced coming in, having been very well traveled in college, playing a lot of football there, and then coming in as a very, very experienced rookie. And it's not meaning to joke on the age, just reality of the situation. There are few players that hit the NFL as experienced as Tyler Shuck, allows him to succeed over the second half of last season. Now defenses have the entire offseason to digest and attack Tyler Shuck. And that is going to be the biggest question on how does he, because there's going to be the push-pull there. He's going to see things he has never seen. He's going to see defenses that have dissected him for 9 months and are attacking him. And how does he bounce back from that? Did we see the physical tools and the rare experience and kind of everything fall in place? Or is this the Saints' next quarterback? And I think that's the biggest question about the franchise in general right now. But as you're looking at the fantasy potential for this offense, that's a massive question on Shuck.
Well, let me just, while you were talking, Jeff, I decided to look up the best quarterbacks drafted in round 2 in NFL history. And you imagine, there's a handful every single year, so there have probably been hundreds of quarterbacks drafted in round 2. It is a very short list that gets very uninspiring very quick. You got Drew Brees. That's awesome. You got Brett Favre, awesome. Randall Cunningham, Boomer Esiason, Jalen Hurts, Derek Carr, Andy Dalton, Jimmy Garoppolo. That's the top 8 right there. So, I mean, like, Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the, outliers to be drafted on round. And I mean, that's just, yeah, I think if Tyler Shuck could have a Jimmy Garoppolo type season where he starts for a couple of years and then he floats around as a backup and makes $50 billion, that would be a very, very good career and life for Tyler Shuck. But I am very much so with you. Like, I'll draft him this year just because there are good weapons around him and I trust in Kellen Moore, but not a guy that I expect to be, long-term starting quarterback. So I'm with you on that. Now let's talk about the receivers a little bit. And we already started talking about Chris Olave and the blood clots. This, I'm a big Chris Olave fan, and I know you are also, as an Ohio State guy, a big Chris Olave fan. We were very much in on him. He had himself a great season, but the vibes right now, Jeff, aren't great. Like, we got, in December, he held that press conference after he had missed some time with a concussion, and he was talking about how last year he took a hit in the head during the Panthers game, and he had talked about wanting to retire at 24 years old, and then comes back next year, deals with another concussion. He's got 4 documented concussions during his NFL career. Now he's missing time with blood clots. I mean, I don't want to make any huge assumptions here. I don't know what's going on, but like, this to me, like, I do start to get concerned when I see a young player dealing with like complicated health problems and talking about retirement. It's not something I'm not panicking. I'm not saying not to draft Chris Olave. I'm not saying to trade him for whatever you can in Dynasty, but it definitely piques my ears a little bit and makes me pay a little bit closer attention to what's going on here.
Yeah, because obviously they go out and draft Jordan Tyson, and they spend a top
Right.
10 pick on Jordan Tyson. They also draft Bryce Lance, and they also drafted Barry Brown. Brown might be more of a special teamer. Lance, not nothing that they go out and draft Bryce Lance. And I know they do like Devon Vele, and I mean that you can make the same old jokes with Devon Vele that you can with Tyler Shuck if you really wanted to go that direction. But they to some extent going out and having Tyson, yeah, you're looking at your overall ceiling, and you're looking at, we've got Olave and Tyson. That gives us 2 strong receivers that we position Tyler Shuck to be the guy, and we're not going to, it's not going to be for lack of trying, putting pieces around him if he fails. The other side of it is, we don't feel comfortable on this contract negotiation with Chris Olave. We want to insulate ourselves to have a different direction that we can go. And Jordan Tyson could potentially be our number 1 receiver. Are we going to move on from Olave? Are we going to explore the trade market? Are we going to allow Olave to walk? We don't want to give him this money. And so I think that the 2 sides of the coin there, the duality of having these 2 receivers and the reality of the situation, it's pretty interesting. Olave is a player that I have not been drafting very often at his ADP. I think it's rather easy for me to pass on him where I'm seeing him. Usually we've talked about Zay Flowers previously in this series. We've talked about other receivers, or there's running backs there.
Rashee
David Montgomery's
Rice,
usually on the board.
Smith.
Jameson Williams is on the board. Like there's guys like that. Yeah, I mean, the volume that Olave saw, but part of that too, drafting Tyson adjusts the potential volume that Olave saw, where the injuries there, and not having one competent receiver and then a whole bunch of question marks, it creates the environment. Everything has changed there.
Now I do want to say, the plan, this episode is going to come out on Friday the 26th, and we got a report from Nick Underhill today as we're recording, Tuesday the 23rd, saying that the plan is for Chris Olave to get off of these blood thinners on Monday the 29th, so less than a week from when we're recording now and just a few days after this episode comes out. They said the plan is for him to be off the blood thinners on June 29th and be a full go for training camp. So, obviously if we see him out there healthy, not limited at all, looking like Chris Olave, yeah, I think, he's somebody that you want to draft. But I do agree that, like, Jordan Tyson being there now, Oscar Delp, who we're going to talk about it a little bit, is going to pull some targets as well. And I feel like there is kind of that crutch argument, as our buddy Chris Harris likes to say, where you can make the argument one of 2 ways. You can say, well, now with a secondary option, Chris Olave is going to see softer coverage, which means more opportunities for big plays and more touchdowns and more yards. But I just see, Tyler Shuck, if we're expecting him to take a small step back in year 2, which I don't think is crazy, and fewer targets going Chris Olave's way because of the extra guys there now. We saw last year everything ran so pure for Olave. The touchdowns were there, the big plays were there, that, yeah, you talk about it, like I don't even need to talk about the other positions, but just where Olave is going right now in the same range as Rashee Rice, Devontae Smith, Emeka Ibuka, Zay Flowers, Lad McConkey, T. Higgins, Malik Neighbors, Garrett Wilson. Like, Olave's going ahead of all of those guys except for Devontae Smith and Rashee Rice, and those are all guys that I would prefer to Olave.
Well, and yeah, maybe Chuck takes a step back. Maybe Chuck takes a step forward, and it could still lead to lower volume for Olave because you've got a young player that is locking onto his primary receiver. He takes a step forward. He starts to process better. He's got Tyson there. I think that you can talk yourself around whatever you want to talk about. The bottom line of it is you're looking at investing a premium draft pick or premium fantasy resources on a player that we're hoping is off blood thinners so that he can do football activity in the summer. And that is a situation where at the ADP, it's just an avoid. And if I'm wrong, it is what it is. I drafted him a lot last year. I liked that last year's cost. This year, we don't pay for last year's costs.
Yeah. I mean, last year, if I remember correctly, he was getting drafted as like the wide receiver 18 or 20 or something like that.
Oh, no, it was like 6th or 7th round. It was like, it was late. Because there was questions about the quarterback and questions about the offense. And yeah.
I was just looking back at a Dynasty startup mock that I did last year with our friends over at Draft Sharks, where I got Chris Olave in the 6th round of a startup mock when he was going into his age 24 season. So there's always kind of been like a little bit, because he was an older prospect that came in, and there's always kind of been this mark on his profile that some people haven't liked, but I'm of the belief that he's a good player. But you talk about like the health concerns with Olave that are very well documented throughout his NFL career. Now you got Jordan Tyson coming in. Jordan Tyson's not a beacon of health by any means. Like, he hasn't been able to practice either. He's been limited throughout minicamp, dealing with a hamstring injury that he picked up in college. So, like, that, a hamstring injury, if he just, tweaked a hamstring in minicamp, I wouldn't think too much about that. But, I mean, he's like 7 months removed from this injury now that is still bothering him. Like, now at the point where I don't feel great drafting Jordan Tyson either. Like, in Dynasty, I preferred him to Carnell Tate because I thought the early opportunity would be there. I think the upside is so high, but now as he's missing training camp, they're hoping that he's going to be, or missing mini camp, they're hoping that he's going to be ready for training camp. Now I'm starting to have some sirens go off about Jordan Tyson as well.
Yeah, this offense is fascinating because the potential, similar to talking about Carolina, the potential is there that this is absolutely the offense that you want to be buying into right now with Shock, with these two wide receivers, with the Jalen Johnson that we saw last year, with having Travis Etienne come in the backfield. The potential is also there that we get the sophomore slide from Shuck, that Olave's missing time, that Tyson's missing time, that you've got just an absolute mess. And so I think it's going to be a fun one to watch. And I was talking to you a little bit before the show about just the vibes in general, and you let it off with which team is looking for the first round loss there. But the vibes, there's a lot of pessimism.
Disclaimer, that was 100% just to upset Joey Wright. Like, that was the point of that opener. So sorry to all the other NFC South fans that took offense to that one.
Well, but there's pessimism in Atlanta. We talked about the quarterback situation there. There was a lot of optimism last year that fizzled out. We've seen 2 years in a row now where things fizzled out and fell apart. At the end of the year, they missed the playoffs. Carolina, the quarterback situation with Bryce Young, a massive question mark. Obviously made the playoffs last year, looked on the upswing, but they don't feel comfortable investing in Bryce Young. Tampa Bay has their own question with their quarterback, and that's a team that looked like they were primed to run away with the division a year ago or so, or more than that, and now they've got major questions and kind of their offense is moving around. And then you run into like the fans and the media around the Saints, and it is like sky high, like let's go, which tells me of like you're in a bad division and you're probably going to be fourth, but you feel good about you're the most optimism around the team, it seems.
Well, if we're going to have some concern about Chris Olave and we've got some concerns about Jordan Tyson, why aren't we higher on Juwan Johnson, Jeff? Shouldn't this be guy, like, if we're, projecting some potential missed time in training camp, maybe some missed games from the receivers, like Juwan Johnson last year, I would very much so say that a lot of his targets were what we would deem struggle targets, but maybe we start projecting more struggle targets to Juwan Johnson this year.
Who's we? Why aren't we higher? Because I'm pretty high on Juwan Johnson, to be honest here. I got 78 receptions, 845 yards for Juwan Johnson. So
all right.
Juwan Johnson's pacing to be a top 12 tight end in my rankings because I think the connection with Shock. I mean, you can joke about the Oregon connection from literally 8 years ago, but at the same time, it played itself out well.
I think they played like 3 games together.
Well, I think they were hanging out and friends, and they knew each other. So but I think that it's and that's one thing. One of the reports that I saw, and I think it might have been Nick Underhill, or he does a fantastic job, or people around the team talking about the involvement of tight ends early in camp, and Johnson's a little bit different than a lot of tight ends where he can stretch the field downfield, he can create big plays. And so I mean, I'm pretty high on Juwan Johnson, Dave. I don't know, it's I think that we've seen, and I think as you're looking, you've got a lot of questions about the wide receiver room here, and Devon Vele probably is pretty clearly the wide receiver 3. Bryce Lance, excited about what he could do, but questions there. You got questions about what is behind Juwan Johnson, and I think that if you're going to have Olave missing time, or you're going to have Jordan Tyson missing time, Juwan Johnson's going to be the probably pretty clear number 2 option in that passing attack.
So do we have any room left over for Oscar Delp? Obviously probably the secondary tight end. I don't know how you're working Noah Fant into your projections, if you've got him ahead or behind Oscar Delp, but Oscar Delp's a player that I really like. And I remember last year making a funny mishap on Twitter when I did my 2025 rookie tight end rankings, and I had Oscar Delp as my 4th tight end overall, and you sent me a text and you said, Dave, I saw that you just ranked Oscar Delp. He's returning to school this year. I mean, this is a guy that I've been watching for years, and I'm just like a big fan of the talent. He comes out, gives us the size-adjusted speed that we want, 95th percentile. He's got the size. He's got the pass-catching chops. Fell a little bit in the draft to round 3, but when I look at so many of the other tight ends that were drafted in this class, guys that are primary blockers, that are going to be inline tight ends, Oscar Delp more so has that skill set that we like for fantasy, where he's going to be running a lot of routes. He's going to be lining up in the slot. He's not going to be much of an inline guy. He's going to be more of that move tight end that's catching passes. So even though there's already an established tight end 1 there, and even though he's a round 3 rookie, could you see Delp becoming fantasy relevant?
I mean, anything could happen. We could not have Chris Olave and Jordan Tyson on the field. Sure, anything could happen. Sure. But to invest in that, I mean, I'm not. Yeah, potential's there. Potential's there. We know he's a plus athlete. We know he's day 2 pick. It could happen, but at the same time, we've seen tight ends with. I mean, it took Colston Loveland. I know there was injuries involved, but it took Colston Loveland the better part of 12 plus games before he really established himself. And that was a guy that went top 10 in the draft. And Cole Kmet is a solid player, but he's not Juwan Johnson, I think. So, Dave, I hear you. And I don't want to crush your dreams, but I think for 2026, you might be wish casting a little bit.
This is more of a dynasty take than anything else, because he was one of my favorite round 3 targets in rookie drafts. I don't think I've drafted him in any best ball yet. But by the time this episode comes out, I'll probably have already taken him in SFB. I've got him sitting in my queue right now as like a round 16 pick in a super tight end premium play. But yeah, I mean, like I do see the upside here, and I think that it's worth talking about him, because I don't think when you just look at projections that Delp is a guy that we can get too excited about. But like I said, with the Olave concerns, with the Jordan Tyson concerns, it's not crazy to think that maybe Delp does end up in a bigger role. And you even talk about the slow start for Colston Loveland. I mean, he was injured he missed all of minicamp. He was injured at the beginning of training camp. I could just as easily point to Harold Fannin or Tyler Warren. I mean, look at Harold Fannin. Harold Fannin was similar draft capital even later than Oscar Delp, and that guy was making a splash week 1, like immediately. So different situation, of course, but like we have seen tight ends that come out and can just immediately establish themselves.
Yes, everything was different there, but you're right. It has happened. There is precedent
And everything
before
was different in
of
Chicago too.
a day two rookie tight end being relevant. Sure, yeah. I mean, but it definitely it could happen for sure. He does. He is a plus athlete, and but at the same time, to me, there are three pretty clear targets in this passing attack. And then that's not even talking about the backfield getting involved in this. And so I think that we're digging deep here too, because Bryce Lance's draft capital is not all that different than Oscar Delp's. So if we're looking for a
Yeah.
fourth option to
And
go
we
with,
did.
or
I will say, like we brushed over Bryce Lance, but I think he's worth a talk. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't spend some round 20 best ball picks on Bryce Lance. Like Tyler Shuck, for his flaws, he does have a cannon of an arm, and Bryce Lance, off the chart, it's athleticism. Like, when I'm looking for a round 20 target in best ball, I'm saying, like, who's a guy that can catch 5 big touchdowns this year? And I think Lance has that upside. I mean, we're getting really deep in the weeds here. Let's just stop. We're talking about Oscar Delp and Bryce Lance way too much. Let's talk about the running backs, Jeff, because I think this is a very interesting running back room. You know me, I love Kendre Miller. And of course, his season ended with a torn ACL. But then Devin Neal came in, and Devin Neal looked fantastic. Was it that game against Tampa Bay, I think? It was like that muddy game where, like, Devin Neal just, like, he's covered in mud. He's got, like, the arm tape falling off. He's got, like, rips on his jersey. Like, that game to me, like, really sold me on Devin Neal. And I wasn't the biggest fan of the prospect, but he just looked NFL ready when he got his opportunity. Alvin Kamara, still under contract there. Sounds like he doesn't want to leave New Orleans. So I was kind of shocked when they went out and got Travis Etienne, because I thought that they could patchwork something together with, Devin Neal and Alvin Kamara and then Kendre Miller returning late in the season. But they clearly thought that what they were missing was a running back, and they went out and they gave Travis Etienne a bigger contract than even Kenneth Walker got with Kansas City. So he got paid. He got a 4-year deal. And it just, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. And, you want to follow the money to some extent, but just a player that I haven't really been able to draft a lot of this year, because I think this is going to be a crowded backfield in 2026.
I don't think it's going to be particularly crowded, to be honest. I think Miller, Neal, Kamara at this point, recognizing at this point, fine. But I think Etienne is just so much of a higher ceiling, and the way that we saw him establish himself last year. And I hear you on surprising move. This is what happens when you have a day 2 rookie that you're paying a day 2 rookie contract to. That's why there's a lot of appeal on having a later quarterback. That's why Brock Purdy, for the beginning part of his career, you had Christian McCaffrey, you had Prime Debo Samuel, you had Brandon Ayuk getting a big contract, you George Kittle around him, because that when you're paying these quarterbacks next to nothing, you're able to put pieces around them. And so I think that they saw opportunity in the market. They went out and they probably, Kellen Moore spending a year there, seeing what they have with Neal, Kamara, and Kendre Miller. Kellen Moore remembering having a pretty strong year with Saquon Barkley, recognizing, none of these guys are Saquon Barkley for sure, but none of these guys are also the guy that I want here as I'm continuing to develop my young quarterback. I want the ceiling that I can have with Travis Etienne here. So I'm going to bring him in, and I find drafting him at ADP in 3rd round. I think he's going to be getting plenty of volume. I'm not overly concerned about a committee approach on this. I think there could be involvement with the other players. It definitely seems like, Kamara, I think he did have the comment of, he'll be, if he's traded, he's going to be on a beach sipping a cocktail, but we'll talk about it when we get to Arizona. I think Kamara, if they come down to it and ask him to give up some money, he probably seems like a guy that he'll be fine giving up some money. He just wants to remain as a Saint. Devin Neal has injury questions right now. I don't think he's practicing. And we know Kendre Miller has injury questions right now. And I think that probably speaks to it as much as anything, on not having a level of trust with Kendre Miller's availability. Devin Neal running into some injury questions within that rookie season. What's left with Alvin Kamara? And again, the ceiling and floor of the Saints, I think, is about as big as any in the league.
Yeah, and I think with Neal, They said it was a minor injury that he like picked up at minicamp, so this isn't still lingering from last year. Like he had the hamstring injury that ended his season, and this it sounds like they're downplaying it, like that he should be back for training camp. But we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, this sometimes it's just vibes, Jeff. And I don't know why, but the vibes with this backfield have been one that I want to avoid, and it's just like looking at some of the other players that are getting drafted in that range, when I see Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, like I would just draft all of those guys ahead of Achane, and I know he's a good player. Like I feel like I've been one of the guys for the last few years that has been pounding the table for Achane, but I loved his role in this Jacksonville offense, and I just can't help but have this fear that Alvin Kamara is just going to come take an annoying amount of targets, and that Devin Neal, when healthy, is going to get in the mix a little bit. I think long term, like we could see the backfield kind of clear out going into 2027, into 2028, and Achane can kind of come into his own in this backfield. But I do have some concerns just because there are a lot of talented running backs with different skill sets in this backfield. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm crazy. I mean, like you said, Kellen Moore, the way that he just leaned on Saquon Barkley, maybe that is what he's looking for in this backfield, but I don't think that Achane is a Barkley level talent.
No, he's not a Barkley level talent, but I also, you like the role that he had with Jacksonville. I would posit to say I don't think his role is all that different than the role he had with Jacksonville. I mean, you could have Kamara as kind of the LaQuint Allen, and you have Neal or Kendry Miller as the Teuton, and Travis Etienne is still the guy. And so I think that there's a lot of potential there for Achane to be the clear bell cow, and that would be a lot of my expectation.
Any final thoughts on the Saints, Jeff?
No, it's just fun. It's just the ceiling and floor of this team. Talk about the Panthers being a team that you want all the pieces of. The Saints have that potential as well, and they are accessible. You could, if you really wanted to, load up and have Tyson, have Achane, have Olave, grab Shuck Late, grab Juwan Johnson, and lean into it and have a stack of this team that is there. And they could be in some of these shootouts here. And so that's it's fascinating offense to watch, because the other side of the coin could work as well. Two receiver injury concerns, Shuck backsliding, the backfield becomes a muddled mess like you're worried about, and then you just have nothing that you can go with here.
Well, let's move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the final team in the NFC South we're going to discuss today. They brought in a new offensive coordinator in Zach Robinson. In free agency, they lost Teddy Bridgewater, Mike Evans, Sterling Shepard, and Rashad White. They added Kenneth Gainwell, David Sills, another NFC South guy that we talked about on this show this time last year, which is kind of funny. Not a common name, but somebody that we talked about a little bit. Jake Browning was also in addition as a backup quarterback. And then draft picks, we got a third round Ted Hurst, and then they spent a pick on tight end Bauer Sharp on day 3. I think the as we always start talking about the quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield with a new offensive coordinator. That is no surprise to him. I came across this a little bit earlier, Jeff. Baker Mayfield is heading into his 13th season since starting in college, and this will be his 14th offensive coordinator in 13 years. He has only had the same offensive coordinator in consecutive seasons once in his entire career, and that was 2020 into 2021. He had Alex Van Pelt for back-to-back years. Aside from that, he has had a different offensive coordinator every single season, and quite a few years where he has lost his offensive coordinator midseason and brought in a second. So more offensive coordinators than seasons played. So I don't think we're like overly concerned about Baker Mayfield trying to learn a new offense, because he's proven capable of being able to do that.
Yes, he absolutely can learn a new offense. There's offshoots. I mean, this isn't exactly entirely foreign where Zach Robinson has experience.
Right.
I don't know for sure if he overlapped was with the Rams when Baker Mayfield was with the Rams, but
I was just looking that up.
Yeah, there's definitely Mayfield has. I mean, Robinson.
And he did,
yeah. Offshoot
when
of
he showed up there for that random Thursday night football game in Los Angeles. Zach Robinson was there.
Well, that really revived Mayfield's career. I think the league was really impressed with what he was able to do on a very, very tight turnaround time frame. But having principles within that McVay Shanahan scheme tree, I mean, that's what they're going out there. They're kind of, they want to stay operating within that tree, but they wanted to go a different direction there because Josh Grizzard struggled in that first season. So they go out and I mean, talked about it already leading into it. The big question around the entire team right now is the contract status of Baker Mayfield, him potentially becoming a free agent. The team, he wants to be paid like a quarterback, a franchise level quarterback, and they're really, really don't want to go there. They want to see it for another season, and they want to see how things come together because we did see. I mean, the injury, things kind of fell apart. Things fell apart. Not even kind of things badly fell apart at the end of last season for the Buccaneers.
So something interesting regarding Baker Mayfield, and you talked about this a little bit with Bryce Young. Through his first 6 years in the NFL, didn't rush almost at all. His career high was 10.3 rushing yards per game. And then out of nowhere 2 years ago, he sets a career high with 22.2. And you think, okay, that's probably a little bit of an outlier. Next year, 22.5, even surpasses that career average. So this is like unheard of, like unprecedented to see a quarterback at age 29 and 30 start rushing the ball a little bit. But I think, 2 years in a row, we'd expect that to maintain. Like he has started playing with a little bit more moxie, I think, kind of bring back some of that swagger that we saw during his college days. But the passing, I think, is where things get interesting. And I remember I caught a lot of flack last offseason, Jeff, and you were on this with me. But like when you look at Baker Mayfield, I think a lot of people just saw that big year in Tampa Bay in 2024 and said, that's it. Baker figured it out. He is now one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. And I said, I don't know, that touchdown rate, completion rate, success rate, like he just hit career highs across the board. And we typically see those regress back to career averages, and that's exactly what happened last year. We just saw that regression hit, and he was still fine. Like you were getting, decent QB2 production for him, and you're looking for that in super flex leagues. But what do we need from Baker Mayfield to hit QB1 status again? Do we just need him to kind of capture lightning in a bottle and hit that really high end, the efficiency on the passing game, or do we have enough rushing now that he can kind of get there even with mediocre passing?
No, I don't think we're there on that. I mean, there's a lot of the path to that. There's no such thing as a Baker push. They're not shoving him into the end zone, even if there are concerns about Bucky Irving around the goal line. You don't have that. I think you do have functional rushing, but it comes down to him being a top 12 receiver, relies on either the explosive passing volume that they had from 2 years ago or just touchdown regression, touchdowns spiking a little bit relative to what we saw. And like we saw with Matthew Stafford of coming off of last year, winning the MVP. The year before that, the touchdowns were down and the volume was lower. He has obviously more rushing than Stafford, but when you're dealing with these these quarterbacks that are not going to be the 500 plus rushing or the 10 touchdowns, 9 touchdowns like we saw with Trevor Lawrence, when you've got that, don't have that type of quarterback, it really does come down to it. And the passing volume is a factor, but it really comes down to touchdown regression and having the touchdown passes that get you there.
And that alone just kind of sums up why you want to throw darts at these late round quarterbacks, because we don't know who it's going to be. Last year it was Matthew Stafford. Everything ran pure, and all of his touchdown passes were hitting, and he wasn't throwing interceptions. And 2 years ago it was Baker Mayfield, and this year I don't know who it's going to be. Maybe it's Cam Ward. Maybe it's Bryce Young. Maybe it's Sam Darnold. Like, we never really know who that guy is going to be, and it's so hard to predict that, the touchdown rates, but that is really what ends up being the difference maker for these late-round quarterbacks. So I think it's really tough to have like a super strong take on Baker Mayfield. I think where he is getting drafted is kind of a back-end QB2. Yeah, we know the upside. Like, we just saw that upside 2 years ago. And I think the downside, like, even if things don't break well, like, there's still going to be enough pass volume in this offense that he can still kind of return QB2 value. So I think Baker Mayfield is, priced perfectly fair, where I was very out last year, where he was going as like a top 8, top 9 quarterback. Now at a depreciated cost, happy to take some shots there. But let's talk about the wide receivers here, Jeff. Mike Evans is out of the picture. Emeka Egbuka has been getting crazy steam. We're recording this on Tuesday night. I just wrapped up an NFFC high-stakes draft. Emeka Egbuka went 2-12 didn't make it out of the second round, and that has been common in these high stakes drafts. Now, there was some good buzz coming out of minicamp, but when you look at Ibuka and Godwin, there's a huge, huge chasm in ADP where Ibuka is going at that 2-3 turn. Chris Godwin is kind of falling in around 7-8. I believe those guys should be a little bit tighter in ADP. Do you agree with that, Jeff? Just you can give me a yes or a no. Do you agree that those guys should be closer in ADP?
You just wanted me to give you a yes or no because you don't want me to dive into when we did our very, very first draft together following the NFL draft, and we
Listen,
were
man,
in
takes change.
round 9 or so, and I'm like, Dave, we got to take Chris Godwin, and you're looking at me like I have horde growing in my forehead in the middle of this stream. But no, I've been drafting kind of a bit of Godwin, and I have been, to be honest, I slowed down a little bit lately on drafting Godwin because you're seeing Jordan Addison sitting around the same range. You're seeing a couple other
Jaden
options.
Reed.
Quentin Johnston is sitting around that same range, and I'm kind of like, maybe I want some Quentin Johnston, maybe I want some Jordan Addison here instead of just having a 60% share of Chris Godwin, because there is the chance that we don't ever see back to prime, but there is also the chance that he's living in the slot, that we're getting the volume, that the connection with Baker Mayfield, where we saw Godwin as the wide receiver 3 overall in fantasy prior to the injury a couple years ago, some of that can definitely come back. And there is also the potential where the second half struggles that we saw, I think it was largely injury related with Ibuka, but the efficiency wasn't fantastic. He wasn't creating separation over the second half of last year. And he's more of they were using him in a vertical threat, and he does have that potential. At Ohio State, he was always kind of more a slot receiver, more of an underneath receiver, supporting receiver for Jeremiah Smith. And so that I think, what is the overall role for Ibuka? And part of it too, to be honest, I'm not really a big Zach Robinson fan. I covered we talk about training camp and doing the stuff for Football Guys with that, and I've covered the Falcons now for, I think this is either going to be my 6th year or 7th. It's like getting up there. Zach Robinson did not inspire any confidence as offense coordinator with the Falcons. So I think thinking that he's going to come in here and solve all these issues, we didn't see him like it's just, I'm very skeptical on Zach Robinson as offense coordinator. And as much as I do like Ibuka, as much as I like Godwin, yes. And it's I think Godwin, the value is great right now at ADP. Ibuka is aggressive. And there are other receivers in the similar area that I'm more comfortable, or running backs in a similar area. 212, that's insane to me, taking him there. And I'll be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong and go Buckeyes, but at the same time, that seems absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and I think so much gets made out of like Chris Godwin. If you look at his historical splits throughout his career, when he plays the Z or when he plays the X, like it is just drastically different. Like this guy is a top 2 scorer playing the Z, and he is like a outside of the top 40 when he's playing the X. So and every offense is different. Like you can't just say that because this has happened previously, it's going to happen now. I mean, we can see they went out and they drafted a tight end. Like maybe they just don't even have a slot anymore. Maybe they live in 12 personnel. Maybe they start running more 21 personnel and having multiple running backs on the field. Like we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but how much does Godwin's role matter to you? Like, does he need to play out of the slot for him to hit? Or can Ibuka be the slot player, and can Godwin play outside now with Mike Evans out of the picture? Because that's the really big thing here. Like, Godwin playing in the slot, well, you've got Mike Evans, one of the best wide receivers in NFL history, really drawing the defensive gravity, made Godwin's job a little bit easier. Like, how does Godwin do now that Mike Evans isn't there? And can he do the same thing that he was doing next to Emeka Ibuka? Or does he have to play in a different role? I feel like there's just so many questions here. And like, I'm talking through this out loud because I don't have the answers, and I don't think you do either. But there's a very wide range of outcomes for both of these receivers.
I'm a simple man, Dave, and I can look at Chris Godwin. I can see, 2019, 1,300 yards, 2021, 1,100 yards, 2022, 23, 1,000 yards each season. 24 was that season that he was the wide receiver 3 before he got injured. He had 576 in 7 games. I mean, I can do the math quickly in my head, but that's well over 1,000 yards. And so you're talking about, other than last year being still really injury limited, you've got 5 of the last 6 seasons well over 1,000 yards. Which of those games was he playing the X that he's supposed to be bad at, and which of those was he just in the slot? Because I just see a guy that just keeps getting 1,000 yards year after year, and so I'm
And I
not
know this
overly.
is something, and I'm trying to find the tweet now. Like, trust me, I'm of the belief that Chris Godwin is just a good football player, but this was something. It was something I remember Ryan Heath shared last offseason, and they do, like, they chart every single play, and he was able to look at his routes run out of the slot and his routes run out of a wide position, and there was a huge chasm between the efficiency and the production. That, like, top 2 in yards per route run, top 2 in yards per reception, and then outside of the top 40 in yards per route run and yards per reception when playing out wide.
And my question on that would be, at what point was that done, and how much of last year? Because so
think last year is kind of a
basically,
lost year.
well, but if you're including it in the
But
sample, I mean, that's going to pull down because
this was
he
heading
was
into last year, is what I'm saying. So it was like
so
something
like
that I
when
came
he was
across last
having like
offseason.
1,000 yards in 5 of the last 6 seasons. Like, it's. I hear you. Who's gonna be in the slot? Is it Jalen Millen going to be in the slot? Is Ibuka, or is
I
it
don't think so.
Godwin? Because I think it's going to be Godwin in the slot. So, like, why do I really care? I guess is part of it. But it comes down, how healthy is Godwin is really the only question. How healthy is Godwin, and how much that pre-injury, how much did that injury take from Godwin? Those are the only real questions that I have on Godwin when it comes down to whether or not he's going to pay off at ADP. And I think it's, again, sitting at a very, very attractive ADP.
Here, I was able to find the tweet. So this was going into last year when he played out of the slot. 2.58 yards per route run was 6th best among receivers, and 0.58 fantasy points per route run was 7th best among receivers. When he played out wide, that dropped to 1.78 yards per route run, which was 46th, and 0.36 fantasy points per route run, which was 51st. So numbers were slightly off, but fantasy points per route run, top 7 out of the slot, 51st when he's playing out wide. So, that I think that's pretty notable. But, like, if he is playing out of the slot, he is getting more fantasy points. That is something that I think, and it's not, a tight split by any means. Like, this is a drastic split between how he is getting his fantasy points depending on where he's lining up. I really do think that is kind of the big question on Chris Godwin. Like, if he's playing out wide and Ibuka is in the slot, then we could be looking at kind of a boomer bust wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type player, where we've seen that when he plays out of the slot, that's when he's getting his 12 to 15 target games, and he's having those. So that's what I want to see, because I think that's what Godwin does best. He is a twitched up guy who can quickly separate, catch across the middle of the field, make plays after the catch. But if this injury has taken its toll and he's not the player he was pre-injury, he might not have that cutting ability, and they might just have to plug him outside and have him run more vertical routes.
Do that same sample for Amon-Ra St. Brown, and what do you think Amon-Ra St. Brown is when he's living in the slot versus when he's outside?
Oh, I'm sure.
What do you think a slot receiver?
Put Amon-Ra outside.
But a big chunk of that career, that Godwin, he was playing with Tom Brady, who loves the slot receiver.
Right.
I think there's layers of context on just looking at a number, that if you were to look at any primary receiver or receiver like that, and what is he doing out of the slot, the way that NFL offenses are structured relative to what is a receiver being asked to do outside, I mean, you're going to see a lot better yards per route run for a slot receiver, because they are intending to get the ball to the slot receiver, and they're a lot more involved versus when they're outside. I mean, are they like, what are they doing on those plays where he's outside? Is he outside because there's two tight ends on the field and they are stacking the box? Is he outside because they're loading up for a deep shot for Mike Evans because they're having extra protections there? There is so much layers of context on that. One, I think you could look at any receiver, any high level receiver, and you would see yards per route run, those types of things operating out of the slot relative to operating outside. You'd probably see some eye opening numbers on any of it, but you don't have any layer of context on what was happening on those plays to impact his overall production. And playing opposite Mike Evans, there were absolutely plays where there are extra protections in that were taking him out of the slot because Mike Evans was generational deep threat wide receiver, and there are absolutely intended plays. The idea that there's this play that is every receiver's running routes and the quarterback's going to scan it. No, you're loading up protections because you're ready. You're picking up the defense and you're ready to take a shot on Mike Evans. You're doing those types of things. And so I think
sometimes, what you're saying
layers
is like,
of context.
Get Chris Godwin out wide on this side of the field to pull some gravity over there, so Mike Evans isn't dealing with
and
a
we'll
congested
throw
middle field where he
Keith
can
in the
run that
game
deep
because
post.
we want him sitting on the backside here so that there's an extra blocker if somebody's coming off the backside, and we're going to load it up and we're going to launch a shot to Mike Evans here in this. There's just layers of context on this. And the other part of it is, like you said, we don't know for sure that he's not going to be in the slot, but I think I see the overall production, and I see a player that has been very, very good for fantasy, very relevant, has posted some phenomenal seasons. And I think that there are, again, context and the numbers. The other context on the numbers that he's been putting up is as the wide receiver 2 in the offense, playing opposite Mike Evans. Yes, that pulls some gravity, but at the same time, it's pretty good production for the number 2 wide receiver in an offense.
And then the last thing I'll say too is, like, we don't even know if there is going to be a slot role in this offense. Like last year, the Falcons ran 12 personnel, 38%. That was the second highest rate in the league. So like when you're running 12 personnel, there is no slot. Like you've got 2 tight ends out there. So if Zach Robinson is coming in there, and like I said, they drafted another tight end, they've still got Cade out in there, we might not even see a pure slot role. Like it might just be 2 receiver sets where both guys are out wide all the time. So yes, there are layers of context here, Jeff. It was just an interesting stat that I came across last year that has kind of been stuck in my mind. The one guy we didn't talk about, though, we've talked a lot about Godwin, we've talked a lot about Ibuka. Jalen McMillan, there's been some positive buzz that he is healthy, that he, is going to come back this year and make some sort of impact. And to me, obviously there's no one-to-one placement for Mike Evans, but I do see him as the guy who can play that deep role. And I don't think that we're going to be looking at, perennial 1,000-yard seasons from Jalen McMillan by any means, but I think he is the guy who can stretch defenses vertically, get the occasional shot, but I think his role is going to open more underneath stuff for Ibuka and Godwin. But again, with how cheap he is, we're looking for these late best ball darts that can end up with 5 or 6 deep touchdowns. Do you think that's something McMillan could end up doing this year? Because that's pretty much all he did his rookie season.
He's paid off well for me on anytime touchdown score. So I'll just say that Jalen McMillan is a player that I like to play on that. I think Ted Hurst is going to be involved, another day 2 wide receiver. I think Ted Hurst profiles to be the most natural physical replacement for Mike Evans as a bigger receiver that can stretch the field outside. So I think that you will see 4 receivers involved here. You'll still see Cade Otton get his fair share of targets. You'll see, we haven't got to the backfield yet. We'll get to the backfield, but I think that there was a dedicated move to have some more passing volume out of the backfield. You start to slice it up in multiple directions, and really it comes down to, if you think Ibuka can pay off anywhere close to his ADP, if you think Godwin is a bargain or Godwin's worth going to, boy, it gets really tough really quick for Jalen McMillan to be that guy. That doesn't mean that Jalen McMillan can't be very good, and that doesn't mean that Jalen McMillan can't absolutely exceed ADP. There is ambiguity within this room, and we love ambiguity. We love to get in these situations, and then there's also upside within this offense. I think there's upside in the offense of the entire division. So yeah, I'm not dismissing McMillan out of hand. It certainly could break in his direction. he could also be more of that boom bust receiver that, yeah, if he doesn't get the touchdown, then it's 4 catches for 28 yards, and you're kind of like, what have happened here?
And then I think K. Dotton, I don't want to say skip over, but I don't think there's a ton to say about K. Dotton. Like, he's kind of that somebody wants to make a 3 tight end build in a best ball league. He's sitting there in round 20 and they'll draft him as their tight end 3. We kind of know it's like contingent upside here. Like if players have to miss time, then K. Dotton steps into a bigger role, but you can't really project a lot of volume going his way. It's just kind of those weeks where Godwin's out or Ibuka is out, Otton's going to see a few extra targets and makes for a viable streamer. Anything to add on K. Dotton?
Spiritual successor to Tyler Higbee. So there you go.
Yep. So let's talk about the backfield, because I think this is where things do certainly get interesting. Bucky Irving, fantastic rookie season, a league winner by all sorts of counts. Then in year 2, just very, very different. Gets hurt early, deals with some mental health struggles, and just didn't really recapture that magic when we saw him on the field, which was very, very infrequently. Then they go out and they bring in Kenneth Walker. They bring back Sean Tucker as well. I'm of the belief that we are going to see some sort of committee approach here, because even when Bucky Irving, had his big late rookie season breakout, it wasn't just the Bucky Irving show all year. Like they were kind of running this hot hand approach where we saw before Bucky Irving's breakout, Sean Tucker had a big game. Rashad White started off the season as the guy, and they just kind of went with this hot hand approach that ended up in Bucky Irving's favor when it mattered most. But I see 3 running backs with very different skill sets here. Bucky Irving is that small, kind of twitched up guy that can make big plays. Sean Tucker, just an absolute burner and a bowling ball. And then you've got Kenneth Gainwell, kind of a passing down specialist. I think we're going to see a lot of touches going to all 3 of these running backs. I don't know what your kind of feel or take is on this backfield, though, Jeff.
I think that I like Sean Tucker, but I don't think that he's going to be actively involved week to week. And I've already talked about process a little bit, but I like to distill it out of basically, what was the running back 1 in this game? What was the running back 2? What was the running back 3 in this game? And as I play these roles out, where do we end up at the end of the year on those potential roles? And when I did that with the Bucs, because I did think that potentially this is a 3-headed committee, but it's really not. It was a running back 3, about 5% of the touches last year.
Oh, wow.
It was really, the games that we're thinking of, the Tucker blow up game, those types of things, there were 2 backs that were available in those games. And what I kind of ran into running the numbers really corroborates what I was able to pick up from the media at OTAs. It definitely did seem like Bucky Irving and Kenneth Gainwell are clearly the top 2 backs. Sean Tucker is clearly in a supporting role, a backup role for Irving. And so I like Tucker and I hear you, but when I like the information that I've gleaned doesn't really suggest that there's going to be a 3-headed committee. And obviously in Atlanta there was not a 3-headed committee. There was 2 running backs in Atlanta. We know from Zach Robinson's time with the Rams just recently last year had a 2-back committee. So I think it would be a little bit of a departure for them to be 3 meaningful pieces of work here going different directions.
And I think when we did see that 3-headed backfield 2 years ago, that was Liam Cohen was the offensive coordinator there. And then we saw Liam Cohen go into Jacksonville and do a 3-headed committee. So, and it's so tough. Like, we're trying to read the tea leaves here, right? Like Zach Robinson, did have, we were just talking when we were talking Atlanta Falcons that Tyler Algier was way more involved than anybody would have liked him to be. And that was with one of the best running backs on the planet. So, Bucky Irving, who I don't think is nearly the talent of Bijan Robinson, is probably going to have to deal with somebody else getting some touches there. And I think you're right. It's probably going to be Gainwell over Sean Tucker. But I like drafting Sean Tucker as that kind of injury away guy just because he doesn't mix in a ton. But when given the opportunity, he can really, I feel like, similar conversation to Ray Davis, has almost no standalone value at all. But if Bucky Irving misses a game, then Sean Tucker can step in and handle 20 touches and go for 150 yards. And if you get a couple weeks of that sort of usage, it's going to pay off there. Now, Bucky Irving is dealing with this shoulder injury, and I think Todd Bowles probably misspoke, but people really overreacted to it. I wasn't drafting any Bucky Irving when he was going in. You're laughing because people overreacted to something?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bucky Irving was going like round 4, and I wanted nothing to do with him at that cost. And then Todd Bowles comes out and says, yeah, we're expecting Bucky Irving to come back sometime this fall. And people panicked. And I got my first Bucky Irving share late in round 6 later that day. And his ADP has just kind of settled in round 6 ever since. The very next day after Todd Bowles said that about, maybe he'll come back sometime this fall, Jason Licht just immediately put that to rest and was like, no, like he's going to be a full go by the start of training camp. Like we have no concerns about the injury, but now we're getting this really good deal on Bucky Irving in drafts. And I'm excited because I like Bucky Irving, the player. It's just back-to-back years. I think he's been overpriced, and thank you, Todd Bowles, for opening up a buy window here.
Yep, I'm there too. I'm enjoying the discount on Bucky Irving. I'm buying it on Bucky Irving where you can get him right now. I mean, the PPR scam cheat code of Kenneth Gainwell, like you're not actively designing the offense the way the Pittsburgh Steelers offense ran last year with Gainwell. And so that's where Gainwell is. It's not a knock on Gainwell is very, very good at the Gainwell things. And Gainwell is a back that he understands his position. He is going to do the right things. He splits pickup, all those things. We've always seen him be a solid complementary running back. But when it comes down to volume, I mean, Bucky Irving is the very, very clear lead back in this backfield for me. Now, we've already talked about Sean Tucker. Yes, there were some instances towards the end of last year where Sean Tucker saw a very dedicated goal line role. And that is, I think that is the concern there. It's less the like 300 back, more of like, if he's just coming in just to run it in from the 2 yards and in, that's the massive question that Bucky Irving would have to answer. And I would imagine I think Bucky Irving is some of the stuff that came out with mental health and everything, that basically he was injured and he got really down on himself because he was injured. Right. And he
first injury of his career. Like he was healthy through high school and college.
Yes. And I think as part of that, it takes a level of self-awareness for a player to have those feelings. Like, it's because I do think that there are guys out there that are just like Cam Scatterbo, like I'm going to run into a tree because I think it would be funny to run into a tree. And there are other guys that are, but as a player like that, he's probably very aware of the goal line area struggles. And that's probably something that he wants to improve on, and recognize that if he wants to get a second contract, if he wants to become a star in the league, he's got to have to be a lot better around the goal line. So I know all the numbers about him around the goal line. I'm wagering that Bucky Irving also knows the numbers around Bucky Irving around the goal line. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he's able to click there.
Yeah, and then I think Kenneth Gainwell, you kind of talked about it, like nobody wants Kenneth Gainwell to be in the role that he was last year. That was very much so the product of a broken offense. But to me, like it's just such an obvious replacement for Rachaad White. Like they are very, very similar players. Like what they do in pass protection, what they can do catching the ball, like soft hands, crisp route runner, good in pass protection. So we can talk about how that like maybe limits Bucky Irving's upside a little bit if he's losing out on some passing down work. But I still think that the hope with Bucky Irving is more that he's going to get there on efficiency, big plays. Like, he's not a guy that we're expecting 25 touches per game from. He's a guy that we're hoping can get there on 15 to 18 touches per game by being wildly efficient like he was as a rookie.
I mean, week 18 in a must-win game, he had 27 touches last year, and week 3 he had 29 touches. So I mean, it's definitely in the wheelhouse
for 17 games.
Well, I don't know. He couldn't do it last year, so we'll wait and see. But and I think one of the things with Gainwell too, the money. So talking about the money, I think what happened is the Steelers would have loved to keep Kenneth Gainwell. More Aaron Rodgers would have loved to keep Kenneth Gainwell. And so when you're a free agent, you're allowed to talk to multiple teams and you're allowed to work for more money. And I think that the Bucs looked at it overall. I think the biggest thing with Tucker is he's a near zero in the passing game. And
Yeah.
so I think that they wanted to, one of the things that Baker Mayfield were talking about a couple years ago, the success there, the running backs were really involved in the passing game with Baker Mayfield in 2024. Last year, the running backs weren't particularly involved with Baker Mayfield. And so I think in seeing Kenneth Gainwell, basically, we know Bucky Irving's pretty solid in the passing game as well. And so wanting to reintegrate that running back passing game and recognizing the comfort that it gives Baker Mayfield, and you're out of the market, you're looking at who's available, who can do this. Gainwell's the best one out there. All of a sudden, we're in a bidding war. We don't want to lose this guy. We're going to give him this money because we can. And I tend to think that that's more what happened, less like a situation of we're just going to blow the market out on Kenneth Gainwell because we've got to get him. It's type thing. And the other part of it too, you watch Hard Knocks when the Saquon Barkley stuff came around, like you're in negotiations with Saquon Barkley if you're the Giants. Meanwhile, the Eagles are in negotiation. You're waiting to hear how that happens. As you're doing that, musical chairs is going on around the league, and guys are falling in place. And what did end up happening in that? They've ended up with Devin Singletary because the other, like Derrick Henry's not just sitting there to say, "Hey Giants, I'm going to let you do what you're going to do with Saquon Barkley, and maybe I'll come play with you." And you're putting your things in certain directions, and I think it just probably ended up in a bidding war. They wanted to get Gainwell. They recognized that the other options had dissipated, and they needed somebody that can contribute out of the backfield in the passing game.
Well, Jeff, any final thoughts on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the NFC South as a whole?
Joey, I'm pulling for you. I hope you're feeling better. Joey, by the time you hear this, Joey, you'll be feeling better. We are a pro Buccaneers program here. We are all my friends and family with the Falcons, pro Falcons program. It's a fun division. It really is. And we joke about them losing the first round, but it is one of those that, for years you'd see the AFC East or the AFC South on Thursday Night Football and cringe. Whenever I see an NFC South, especially on Thursday Night Football, it seems like, but the NFC South matchups in primetime are always so fun. It is really a fun division.
Well, I think that'll do it for today. We're going to be back with the NFC North next week, Jeff, which I am thrilled to talk about. That is going to be a fun division with some moving parts and some returning faces and just a lot of fun to discuss there. And then we'll wrap up next Friday with the NFC West. So I want to thank everybody so much for taking the time to listen. These episodes, we just get so into it that I always forget to do the like and subscribe and comment and all that. But if you are sitting here right now, an hour and 50 minutes into this episode, you are undoubtedly one of our most hardcore listeners. So please let us know with a comment in YouTube or an Apple review, something to let us know that you made it to the very end of this episode, because we appreciate you guys more than anybody else out there that can sit here and listen to us just yap to each other about our half-baked takes for 2 hours. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back soon to finish out this NFC series. And then before we know it, training camps are going to be here. We'll be reacting to news, getting in the swing of draft season. It is coming up on us quick. So I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to tune in, and we will see you soon.